Hey there! Thanks for joining us at Flipside Frolic, where we learn to understand each other's perspectives by flipping the script and having some fun. Here we go.
All right, we're live. Welcome.
Thanks
Tom.
for having me here, Carl.
Oh, anytime, Tom. So, thanks for joining us here at Flipside Frolic. I'm Carl Kamick. I got Tom Day here with us, and I brought him in because I really appreciate the actions that he's taken in his service-oriented life and giving back to the community and all these sorts of wonderful things. Since being a fellow veteran, we've worked together a lot with the VFW, the American Legion, different veteran organizations out there. He's been implemental in a lot of different veteran organizations. So we're gonna just let Tom just tell us a little bit about your maybe quick growing up, high school, degrees, getting into the military, just a little life story, and we'll start there.
Sure. Yeah. No. Well, I was born and raised in State College, Pennsylvania, Penn State's college town, where I went to undergrad. Working class family. I, did my undergrad at Penn State, and after I was done, I went into the military. Served 5 years in the Army's 101st Airborne Division. I was a military journalist, and somewhere had to have been that I interacted with our now Vice President, J.D. Vance. He too was a military journalist, and I know I looked up his bio. He went through training at Fort Meade a month or two after I left, and there aren't more than a few hundred military journalists. So at some point, I'm sure I had to have interacted with him. So I don't recall. I'm sure he doesn't remember me. So just a cute little nugget, I guess. After I was in the military, moved here to Chicago and did the Medill School and did the GI Bill, Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern. And I was a reporter for a little while. I covered Robins Air Force Base, Georgia, for the Macon Telegraph, Macon, Georgia Telegraph. I did Afghanistan for a few months as a correspondent for McClatchy Newspapers, which owned my newspaper in 2009, 2010. Came back here again under the GI Bill to do a public policy program at U of Chicago. A little after that was on a team that got the Bunker, now Bunker Labs, business incubator for military veteran-owned businesses and startups going. That under the leadership of Todd Connor and Brandon Boder, two very close buddies. We built that into a national organization really within a year. Actually, not a year ago now, it was acquired by Syracuse University, and it's now a nonprofit under their Institute for Veterans and Military Families.
Tell us a little bit more just about that, because when was the founding of that? What year?
It was 2014. So Brandon and Todd have been getting it going, and I was the kind of third wheel. And applying for grants and getting the word out.
And the main premise of the organization is getting veterans coming back from service and assisting them in making their ideas happen, as far as if they have a vision for a plan or a nonprofit or a business, to give them some of the key startup steps to carry them along that journey.
Yeah, that's right. It was largely in the tech sector, but Todd rightly kind of opened up the area of focus to include a bunch of other sectors that aren't necessarily tech. We had gotten it going in a tech-oriented workspace, 1871 at the 12th floor of Merchandise Mart. That's kind of Chicago's, at least at the time, flagship entrepreneurial support organization. Todd really pushed out at the time the Bunker network into as many other regions as we could, so as it not to be just a Chicago thing. We got a foothold in Los Angeles with a contact there, with in Colorado Springs. I remember that. We got a partner working the Bunker Network and a host of other cities, and including Wisconsin. I mentioned Wisconsin because my good friend Mike Ertmer, we lost recently, was a founder of the Bunker organization in Wisconsin. And I just found out he passed away a few weeks ago. Mike was a great guy, and certainly somebody we benefited a great deal from at the early stages of getting the Bunker going. And after I left the organization after a few years on serving on the board, and very capable leaders really expanded that organization to a point where to really, as my understanding, frankly from the outside looking in, it needed somebody to really provide that back end support that only an organization the size of Syracuse University could do for them, and I'm glad to see that Syracuse acquired that organization, because that there is a need, I think, for a bunch of different pathways after folks serve in the military to integrate themselves into civilian employment. And part of that story is entrepreneurship, and I think the Bunker nationally could provide a really great partner for the VA, for the Department of Defense, for just the broader veteran community nationally, to make sure we have avenues of support for folks leaving the military to enter into entrepreneurial careers, as with every other career field as well.
And that, that's pretty much how our paths crossed, from just working with veterans. And shout out to Paul Knudsen and the VFW, the American Legion, and a lot of these other really motivated younger veterans that were out there trying to assist the transition to civilian life through. I know, like, Paul was actually my first podcast host actually on here, so he's episode 1. He's got a challenge coin too, so and we'll be hanging out with him for the Super Bowl more than likely at the 883 Post VFW Hall in Montclair on diversity in Chicago. But yeah, that was, I remember we did some work even with getting with board of directors in different various organizations to try to help veterans write resumes and try to translate the skills that they got in the military into something that would seem beneficial to a corporation, which is sometimes tactical language is necessary in order to really help people understand the skills that they learn that they don't even know they have, that are such a great benefit to organizations and companies. Where, like, the one thing I remember from doing at the Pritzker Military Library, we did Paul was instrumental in organizing an event that brought in CEOs and veterans, and then then they had a panel discussion and then they had some veterans come up that were successful, and then there was a social afterwards to where it was almost like anybody that's showing up there should probably leave this with a job, just because it was such a cool little networking event. But one of the things that really stepped out was, like, for CEOs or business managers or owners out there, it's like, if you get a problem that you just don't know who to dump it on, it's like, dump it on a veteran and watch what happens. And that was really, it really kind of hit home that, they might be quiet, or they might be this, they might just kind of be a little shy or whatever, but we somehow just get this idea of just tackling problems with solutions, and that's one of the things that it just seems to be ingrained in most veterans that most don't even really realize they have.
Well, look, we as a society are rightly in an overdue fashion reassessing how much value we put in college degrees. Speaking as somebody with one, a few, if somebody comes to you with a college degree, particularly one from an institution that's perceived to be elite, there are employers that tend to put folks on a pedestal for this reason. Look, I, that's their choice. But what I think we also need to reflect on is that there are other indicators of virtue, certainly in employment fields, that may not come in the form of a college degree, but are nonetheless very valuable. And military service, I think, should be certainly a signal that a candidate is qualified for certain endeavors in the same way a college degree might as well.
And veteran preference towards the application process is something that we don't want to discriminate against others that didn't have that, but some people might just not realize what an asset they have there, even though maybe on paper some of those extracurricular activities don't seem to line up with your organization, but give it a shot and watch what happens, kind of thing. For sure. I know, in my experience, it's the same thing. My degree, I went to the Navy. I was short term because military. Clinton was making his military cutbacks back then, so I did a short stint. I had a 2-year degree with 10 years in active reserves and got out early at 1 year and 3 months. So, but I still got an honorable discharge. So tuition at State College was paid for by the Illinois Veteran Scholarship Fund. I commuted to Northeastern Illinois University and got a degree in geography and environmental studies with a concentration in resource conservation and management, and then a minor in music with a concentration in jazz performance. But interesting, that was somewhat stimulated from my experience in the military. With some people don't realize that once you're 20 miles off the coast and with all these cruise lines and military vessels and everything else, the forecastles open for the dumping of trash. And it was sickening to see how much stuff we just dumped in the ocean. Like that kind of stimulated some of my green initiative and environmentalists activism kind of side. During my stint in my med cruise to the Mediterranean, in Italy and Greece and all these other things, which was awesome. I did a 6-month med cruise and at that point in 91, 92, they really started preventing the dumping of plastics in abstract bans and different things like that. So there was an effort there to try to limit the amount of stuff that we put into the ocean.
Right.
But anyway, so like you said, with the importance of a college degree as a prerequisite to even apply for certain jobs is a bit sickening. But I got that degree mostly because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. So I was taking classes that interest me, and then I go to a guidance counselor and say, hey, what do you think I should do? And it's like, well, that's not really how it works.
Right.
It's like, you're the guidance counselor, guide me. And I'm like, okay, let's look at this from another angle. Here are the classes I took. Here are the ones I did very well and that I really enjoyed. What field is in the world that is somewhat based on those classes? And so I was 3 years in just about without a declared major. So every semester, because I couldn't make a decision, so every semester I'd get like new requirements thrown on. So I'm like, you got to lock your major in so you don't you're going to be here for the rest of your life filling requirements. And so I basically went in and said, here's my classes, here's what I've done. What's the fastest way out here then? Right. And that kind of was what ended up with that degree. I only had to take like 3 more classes and I graduated. But with that, I never once in my life filled out an application even within that field in any way, shape, or form. Right. Because I just kind of was in the transportation industry at the time and was making kind of decent money, and there wasn't that much money in environmental activism at the time, so I just kind of fell into the career that I fell into, which had nothing to do with the college degree. Now, that being said, I talked in the last episode actually a little bit, like with Michelle Pfeiffer and Dangerous Mind. Your mind is a muscle. You have to work it out. So is somebody with a college degree better than somebody that doesn't have a college degree? Well, the act that they were able to use their mind, they were able to study for information for an exam that they were able to retain long enough to pass the exam, and then maybe forgot shortly thereafter. So we might sometimes think that it's pointless, but it's really not, because you did use your brain more than somebody that didn't go to college. So that the ability of picking up new skills or learning new things might be a benefit to somebody that did go to college as opposed to somebody that did not. But how much weight is put on those degrees and this power of authority because you have a degree. Where you look at somebody, for instance, like Charlie Kirk, that dropped out of college but has read thousands of books. So how many books did you actually read in college? I have a few books that I read. So if we continue to learn for 10 years after college by reading and diving into various topics and things, it doesn't make somebody with a degree that did as little as possible to get by 15 years ago is better than me with life experience of 15 years in the real world or something.
Yeah, look, I mean, are there some things that I might be more inclined to hire somebody who graduated with honors from Harvard than somebody who didn't go to school? I suppose probably. But, the first of all, establishing firm requirements that so-and-so may not even be considered for a certain position, frankly, including being an officer in the United States military, until you have a college degree, is just silly. I mean, there are college degrees that have nothing to do with employment as an officer in the U.S. military and a host of other things. That establishing that firm requirement that you must be accredited by a university is silly.
Yeah.
And it is opening up a social chasm between people who have a college degree and people who don't, that resembles what we have been told, rightly, about race in America. Like folks of color have certain life experiences that open up social chasms from white folks like us, and I that is no doubt accurate. But are we also opening up these social chasms between people with college degrees and without, where we are not even able to relate with one another? That's deeply unfortunate and something that needs to be corrected.
Yeah, and that again is part of this divisional tactic of keeping the masses separated, and tribalism, and understanding the sociological and psychological aspects of human nature, that we want to be a part of a clique. That's just naturally part of our evolutionary process, which is obvious. I don't have to be a PhD in psychology to understand that you see that in the real world on a daily basis. And so us versus them, the college versus the tradesmen, which is just a ridiculous thing to even say, in that even maybe it should be that, to try to stay solution oriented, is that companies with a requirement for college degree, that 5 years of life experience in that field should absolutely count as that prerequisite to that college degree. Perfect example is my friend Matt Peterson. Shout out to Matt. He probably wouldn't agree, of course, but probably the best expert in Flash coding of anybody that I personally know, and probably most in the marketplace. Now it's old and outdated and isn't used nearly as often. But without a college degree, 20 years experience in that type of coding, you can't tell me that, and plus his work ethic and abilities are just off the charts. So, for somebody to think that he's not even qualified to apply for this position somewhere as a result of that, it's asinine. Sure.
No, it is. Look, Penn State, where I did my undergrad, incredible university, very intelligent people I went to school with, very, very intelligent people I learned from. But, when I left, I graduated with a degree basically in drinking lots of alcohol and chasing around girls with fake tans and lip gloss.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but part of the rite of passage in the college experience, right?
Right. But there were plenty of folks when I graduated at the age of 21 who also were 21 years old, who were in plenty more better a spot to contribute to a firm than I was, who didn't have a college degree at that point. And luckily for me, I had the sense to go into the military at that point. But I just reemphasize, there are folks who are leaving our universities that are getting a leg up because of these formal requirements to have a college degree, or just social requirements that I'm afraid their college experiences have not equipped them with the training that I think maybe some folks think that these college degrees did, in fact, equip them.
Well, that's funny because the military service was the same thing. I was starting to get a little off the rails prior to going to the military in high school, in a sense, and the family and the world around just assumed that the Navy was going to straighten me out, give me discipline, and all this other stuff. So, fortunately for me, I believe, and again, some people know I'm 20 years sober, and my life has changed dramatically from cleaning out and doing good work and helping others and becoming a grateful and happy, useful member of society, as opposed to the path that I was on, let's say, and that's been a wonderful experience. And I think I would bet money that the captain of the ship that I was on, the boat, was probably programmed, and because when we went overseas, he was adamant that no drinking age is their culture, not ours. So the ability to just send some cat out at 19 years old to go crazy is not the same thing as someone that was raised with the ability to have a glass of wine with their family or some of these things, and not put the stigma on this idea that when you're 21 you could drink. It's like there could be a lot of conversations, hours just on that in itself. But the reality was that I came back, and I kind of, as almost a con man in a sense, I used that military service as an excuse to let everybody pretend that they thought I was super disciplined and straight and narrow, and I rode that out for a while just to hey, man, they really changed Carl. It's like, I don't know how much they did, but obviously we still got some work ethic and some skills. And I worked in a 20-degree below zero freezer on a supply ship. Yeah. And worked long hours, which obviously most 17-year-olds or 18-year-olds never did. So it kind of motivated me a little to say, you know what, I don't know if I want to do stuff like this for the rest of my life, so maybe I should go back to school. And that's what I did, and was able to graduate with over a 3.0 average, whereas in high school I was, enough to get by. To this day, I do firmly believe that for the kids out there, it's hard to tell you anything. I understand that, but I know in my heart that it was harder for me to do as little as possible than it was to just do the work and get straight A's. I believe it's harder to get straight D's than it is to get straight A's. Because how much work I did to figure out how little I had to do, or I'm failing this class, so I gotta work a deal with the professor or the teacher so I could do an extra credit assignment and just get me that D. Right. It's ridiculous. Just do the work and get the A. It's not that hard. But yeah, so that's great, and that's a good start, to the story, because and then from there, you have these views on education and these different things. So what came next then? I know there was a few different keys to your...
Yeah. So I ran a primary against Danny Davis and got crushed, as I should have. It was my introduction to Chicago politics, as I explained to folks. Look, the campaign was ultimately kind of an amateurish endeavor on my part. But I had some ideas I wanted to get out there, including a subject I know you know well, the need to get manufacturing back to Chicago, and push some of those ideas, and lost. But got my name out there, I can tell you.
Well, again, and anybody that takes an action, that's another thing. The thing that I really appreciate about Tom is that you have this ability to take action when you see something, and regardless of the outcome, the experiences that you've learned, the lessons you learned, the ability to maybe do something later and learn from just the process of getting on the ballot, I know is kind of a tricky thing, which kind of keeps the riffraff out. So you got to be in the clique in order to get on the ballot, and just to get on the ballot is a success in my view, 100%. And another thing, okay, folks, we get it that two white guys sitting here on a podcast talking about racism is not we're not the authority on this subject, but in my life experience, when you want to talk about a racist society in Chicago, particularly, which is a very large city, Danny Davis is an institutional, decades-old politician that's been in the race. My emphasis to even assist you is obviously to help a friend was one, but the act of going out and signing petitions to get somebody on the ballot, hell, let's get as many people as we can on the ballot. This is what this election process is supposed to be about. And I was very surprised to hear from most people signing the ballot that they were kind of like, no, I'm fine with anybody getting on the ballot, but Danny's always been good to me. He's never been a problem for me from all demographics. Yeah. So if there was really core racism in this society for a predominantly area that was largely white, you would think they would have voted for the white guy over the black guy if they happen to know that was the existence, if racism really did exist. And that's absolutely not what happened, obviously. So you're not going to just win because you're white in a demographic area that has a lot of white population. And so at the time, I also supported the idea of just get out the incumbents, man. We just need some new blood, so that was kind of another motivation to just try to get some of these politicians that have been there for decades out and get some fresh blood in. But I also, on the flip side of that, I do realize that the experience in the process of getting legislation through, you can't just have a bunch of new guys in Congress either, because that ain't going to work as well. That's right. But what an experience. I mean, just to be able to, it's a success in many, many, many ways.
Well, look, I think, particularly on my side of the aisle, the Democratic side of the aisle, we now appreciate the need to have a much higher velocity of folks coming in and out of the system. I mean, my party facilitated the Biden 2024 campaign, and you see what that did for us. There is a season for leadership, and that season inevitably will end for the new generation to come in. And obviously, we pushed a flawed incumbent president that there was no appetite for a re-election campaign, that nonetheless some senior folks in the Democratic Party and President Biden himself insisted on pushing forward with anyway, and you see the results. So, I am aware of how how difficult it must be to walk away from power. Not having achieved it myself, I get it. But when we don't, set limits, the American people have a way of setting limits for you, and that is what we saw in the previous election.
And sometimes there's some delusion with what reality, because some of these powerful people are out of touch with the true talk on the ground, and they can have all the campaign advisors and door knockers tell them, hey, this is what we're hearing, and whether they choose to not accept that or something is obviously a problem in some ways. But the ability for anybody to call themselves a Democrat and understand that we have some issues and we could admit those issues and try to work with those and move on. And so it's interesting because, like, for me, I don't know how much I'm going to do a live stream like once a week where I really just kind of rant on some of the current issues and stuff. And I'm not that refined when it comes to posting online and social media and stuff. And it's amazing how, like, somebody can label you for a single post, which was a big part of the problem. To label people just because I might be, one issue oriented about the ability of maybe the right to bear arms is something that's important to this Constitution. It doesn't make you a right-wing extremist, Nazi, Christian nationalist, or whatever. They want to take these parties to the extreme just to try to divide people. And my father was a mechanic at a dealership. He did the door knocking. He worked with the aldermen. He was a precinct captain. He did the work. He volunteered his services and was referred to a city job as a mechanic. Absolutely nothing wrong with that process, right? If he was a qualified person for that position that got a job as a mechanic for the police garage working on squad cars, and he managed to raise a family, give the opportunity for all those kids to go to college, even though we only got a 50% turnout on the 4 kids, that 2 made it and two dropped out, which is damn a pretty good statistic when you talk about generational increases in ability or education or whatever for somebody that maybe barely graduated high school. So that's a success, and that's a man, and that's a supporter of his family and all these other things. And now if somebody that was bagging groceries at Jewel got a job as a city electrical inspector, well, obviously that's corruption and that's a problem, and that's a whole nother area. But for me, lifelong Democrat. Dad always said, just vote blue, just vote blue, just vote blue. And for me, when I was a punk teenager, obviously, it was like, I'm going to exercise my right not to vote, and that's a right also. But his power was that he had 7 voting members in that household, and that's how he can pressure the aldermen to get the things, his curb fixed or whatever the case may be. And that's part of how the system works, and that's a good thing. And so I was kind of like, that's where when I was off hurt from work, that's when we really knew each other more, because I had time on my hands. So I was doing more veteran work and stuff. But the idea of the Middlecrat Party, I almost went out to start my own party, because it's like everybody you talk to is pretty much in the middle here, and they use these issues to divide us. And so my personal experience is, I'm a union member. I'm the delegate for the Chicago Federation of Labor for my local. I'm involved with my local. I'm involved with all sorts of things, because when, it's just from recovery or whatever, when somebody needs help and they ask for volunteers, my hand just kind of always goes up. But I do have to be reserved enough to know that I'm not going to commit to something that I don't really have the time to do fully. So when you talk about getting involved in scouts and getting involved, I was the president of Chicago Marine Aquarium Society, local fish club, so it was like I was always getting involved in things. And with that, it was like the process of the working people in this country needing help in bringing manufacturing back and creating high-paid jobs, not just Walmart jobs, is important. And we all agreed with that. And it was at one point where the DNC has to admit that they made some super errors over the last 15 years. And to say to Hillary Clinton, for instance, that when you're fighting with Obama, initially, if people can remember with short-term memory loss, if they could remember back when prior to Obama getting elected, it was incredible that the Republicans at that time had nothing. They had nothing. The Tea Party kind of came along as a grass party movement of some basic truths and common sense thinking about America first. And they kind of took that over, even though the founder of the Tea Party is like, I'm not a Republican. He was more of a libertarian, right? And so they just stole that energy and kind of started, but they had nothing. And for the DNC to talk to Hillary, and we all know, said, hey, Hillary, move aside, let Obama go, and after 8 years, you're our horse. He'll be the first black president, you'll be the first woman president, life will be wonderful. And that happened. And then Sanders kind of came along with a grassroots movement that grabbed a lot more steam than maybe the DNC appreciated. And it seems somewhat obvious that some of the polling and some of the slander and some of the things, because that promise to Hillary had to be fulfilled, because you didn't want to cross Clinton, of course. And so when they chose Hillary, I was kind of more of a Bernie bro at that point, and I was just like, what is going on here? You know what I mean? And so I was pushed away from the Democrat Party as a lifelong Democrat. And then they'll say, you moved right. It's like, I didn't move right. I'm still right where I am. And I have my morals and my ethical code, and nothing much has changed in me. But the left went further left, and the right came closer to where I am. Like, you know what I'm saying?
So, look, what is right, what is left, what is liberal, what is conservative. I find these things, it's not altogether clear what is what exists on a certain spectrum one year to the next. I will say this, that the Democratic Party gained a lot of energy in Theodore Roosevelt, or rather Franklin Roosevelt's time, Harry S. Truman's time. There's a biography of Truman right behind you, from organized labor, right? The Democratic Party in that generation was the party of the working class, right? In the 60s, the energy suddenly was being gathered on college campuses, and the Democratic Party has, to a very unhealthy extent, certainly in the present day, continued to gain energy from college campuses, and I think that's the wrong approach. I think the Democratic Party needs to, refocus itself on working class people. Stop drawing a line between folks, back to our previous conversation, between folks with a college degree and folks without one, and saying we're going to represent the folks with the college degree. That's clearly not going to work. And, stop with this culture war stuff, okay? Trump's going to try to pick culture wars for the next 4 years. I don't care, okay? He's ordering folks to remove the pronouns from their email signatures. What's my view on it? My view is I got other things to worry about, right? My view is let's focus on getting manufacturing back, and how the loss of, in the context of Chicago, we're talking hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs. What has that done to our communities? What has that done to our social fabric? And the neat thing about the current time is, the previous administration, the Biden administration, even some of the Trump 1 administration, there was a refocus on industrial policy, right, to get manufacturing back. Not just accept that we're going to be the world's accountants and consultants and everything else under the umbrella of professional services, and they'll do the manufacturing in China. No, no, not at all. No, we need to, particularly with the national security sector, if we're going to be equipping our service members with weapons and systems to go, assert American strength leadership, those systems can't be manufactured in China. Duh.
I cannot understand how that isn't the most common sense statement made by an individual in the world.
Right. So, I would encourage my fellow Democrats to, if they're going to go get upset about culture war stuff on Fox News, let them. What our focus needs to be on is reforming our own views, frankly, and getting back to building things, getting back to asserting the United States as the manufacturing superpower, where I read a report by the UN that projected that China's going to manufacture 45% of the world's industrial output by 2030. We're going to be at 12%.
Mm-hmm. Not a great thing.
Never.
Nothing against the Chinese. We're not xenophobic and all this other stuff. But
look, I don't want Xi Jinping, overseeing production of half the world's industrial output. Period. End of discussion.
Right.
We need to be, manufacturing everything we can here in the United States.
And okay, we can talk economics, and we could talk the cost of products, and we could talk. I talked a lot about Super Capitalism. Is a great book, and where it's just like the race to the latest greatest thing, and we have all these different hats now. I was mentioning on the last podcast that we have a labor hat, and we have a worker hat, and we have a investor hat, and we have a patriot civilian citizen of this country hat. And those hats are changing from time to time now, which it wasn't the case before. So when you just worked for a company and you got a pension, you didn't have to worry about investing. You concerned yourself with the union to secure your job and all these sorts of things, but you didn't have all these other hats. Now you do, because it's more diversified with all this sort of stuff. And to diversify your income and your investments and all this other stuff is just smart. And we're learning more about that. We don't have to rely on a pension that might get taken from us, which has happened, and it's horrible. And yet, so we have to be smart. And I when I got my job, I almost assumed that my pension would not be there when I retired, so I had to plan. And so I told the story yesterday that I contributed to my 401k the same amount that I put in with my pension, because I put a lot into the pension. And the old school guys are like, this is the best thing since sliced bread because it's guaranteed. It's like, maybe, but guess what? If you put that same amount of money in a 401k over 40 years, guess what? You're going to retire with $1.5 million in the bank. And when you die, guess what your wife gets? Not just half. So there's certain things that aren't great about pensions also, but although the guarantee is nice. So there was all those sorts of issues that, like you were saying, that we have to bring manufacturing back. We have to be self-supporting. We have to be, much more understanding that it's a dangerous world, but this idea, same kind of thing, like just because it's cheap, The High Cost of Discount Culture is a book that it doesn't make it great. And so we're not going to pay triple. Like it's almost like the problem with online and competitiveness, is so much harder to compete in the marketplace. So price points do come down. True. So the local fish store, I want to support him as an entrepreneur, because I want him there in case I need something for my fish tank. I could just go and get it. Now with Amazon, you could get it next day, all this sort of stuff, but you don't want those brick and mortar stores to go. You have to support them. Or somebody will go in there and pick his brain with his 40 years of experience in the industry and then go home and order stuff online just to save $20 on a $150 order. Like, pay the guy for his time. And 20% higher cost at brick and mortar when you gathered all this information and you got support and a place to ask questions and all this other stuff, pay that cost because it's important. Now, if he wants to charge triple for a pump that I could get on Amazon, it's like, come on, for the same exact pump? Well, we can't have this either. So there's a fine line, and I do believe that an ethical consumer that is aware and educated on the topics will be willing to pay a little bit more for a shirt that you're wearing if you know that it wasn't made in a sweatshop in China. And this idea that, reparations or slavery and all this different stuff in this country that we should be concerned about, well, let's concern ourselves with the fact that slavery is happening right now all over this world and nobody seems to care about it. They just want to be a social media warrior on their smartphone that's got cobalt in it that was mined in Africa from slaves. Like, we have to understand that maybe the best answer is not just to get the cheapest product.
So in the 1960s, an economist in the Nixon administration, Robert Bork, who trained at the University of Chicago, argued that federal policy should permit, and this is reductive, don't get me wrong here, but do the research on his arguments if you'd like to get more in depth. But at a high level, argued that the federal government should approve mergers if it produced lower prices. Okay? Never mind competition. Federal law, in my judgment, dictates that federal antitrust policy preserve competition. This argument, which carried the day as far as public opinion goes across administrations, argued that instead mergers should be approved even if it did eliminate some competition, if it resulted in lower prices. We prioritized consumers over the worker. that, in my judgment, is the product of Bork's theory. Right? You may remember Bork. He was nominated for the Supreme Court by President Reagan, and then Senator Biden defeated his nomination, or defeated his nomination on the Senate floor. So, as we rethink so much regarding manufacturing in the U.S., yes, antitrust policy is a part of that. And Vice President Vance, to his credit, has argued, for a much stronger antitrust policy than typically you see from Republicans, and said nice things about former FTC chair Lina Khan, who was appointed by President Biden, and then Senator Vance said, approved or made some public statements that suggested he approved of Lina Khan's more muscular posture toward antitrust. We can get into all the fine details of what that might look like, but what I think we need to reflect upon is we need a much better balance between prioritizing the consumer and also prioritizing the worker. My spending is your income, your spending is my income. If you are spending less, my income is going to be less, right? That's a kind of a foundational economic concept. If there is a price we pay for low prices, right? And it's a price we pay by shipping manufacturing jobs overseas. It's a price we pay by allowing global behemoths to grow to multi-trillion-dollar valuations, as we have a number of companies now in big tech. We live in a far too consolidated corporate environment, in my judgment, and that has been given to us by nearly a half a century of antitrust policy that prioritized low prices over what I would view as fair wages.
Well, and shout out to Rob Ryder, the president of the Chicago Federation of Labor. Being a delegate to that, I much appreciate that position, so much for the sole reason of you could show up at your union meetings and you could be supportive and you could get some information. But the idea of the Chicago Federation of Labor is the 30, 40, whatever the amount of unions that are a coalition in Chicago that all work together to have a stronger voice. But also that the numbers that come out of that organization that can directly show and explain to somebody the cost that you're talking about in dollars and cents of how much that money going out of the community is affecting the local community, and how important that is. But on the flip side of that, I also was like, I had a conversation with a few leaders in the labor movement that, the presidential administration, yes, is important, and the director of labor and the secretary of labor and some of these positions, yes, you want pro-union people in those, or you want pro-worker people in those positions. But the more that we lobby and pass legislation to protect workers at the federal level really undermines the local unions in a lot of ways, because it gives the impression that the unions are unnecessary. I have all these federal laws to protect me. What do I got to pay union dues for? This is a waste of money. And it makes it hard to organize and help other locals when, regardless of what the federal government does in any way, shape, or form, when it comes to the union movement and the working people, you want to organize your local unions because you feel your corporate employer is taking advantage of you, then do so. And just let's not restrict that through the federal government saying that here I am as a union worker in Chicago with an anti-strike law. Like, I can't legally strike. Like, okay, how's that work? So some of that takes away some of the power, but in the same token, the workers always have the power as long as they have the ability to organize. And
we need, I hear your point. Let me add to where I think organized labor as we begin to think about reshoring, and it's remarkable to say, but yes, I mean, we in many ways are just now beginning to rethink about reshoring some of the manufacturing we've lost. We are not the only country confronted with automation. We are not the only country confronted with robots and AI and so forth. Germany has been confronting these technological advances just the same as we are, and yet nearly a quarter of their workforce is in manufacturing, whereas we're down to like 5%, something like that around here.
For union membership as well, which collates.
So like, let's get organized labor to the table in figuring out how we're going to push more folks not into college degree programs that frankly aren't going to amount to much, but think about careers in manufacturing and apprenticeship programs and getting trained in some of the advanced manufacturing technologies that we need to build into our production facilities here in Chicago and in the United States. Organized labor has to be at the table in thinking through how to get young people into those programs, and we need to dramatically expand and fund apprenticeship programs. Absolutely, organized labor, should be fighting for wage increases and fighting for seats on corporate boards. That's just common sense. You and I are, I'm sure, lockstep on the need to give our workers a voice in our economy moving forward. I would just layer on this that there's also a function organized labor needs to be involved with that I don't know is necessarily appreciated in more contemporary conversations. Not just picket lines, which 9 times out of 10 I'm all supportive of, but also in workforce training and making sure that not just new folks coming into manufacturing are ready to go, but also folks who have maintained careers in manufacturing are kept up to date with new manufacturing technologies.
I can't disagree with that in any way, shape, or form, obviously, and I think that most Americans and most people would 100 on the left and the right this is common sense stuff, right? And how you facilitate that obviously is sometimes the question, right? So in one organization I'm involved in that believes heavily in the group conscience, that the idea that a committee of 6 fair-minded people get together and you debate your ideas and then the group votes, and if you lose, you trust that the group is making what's best for everybody as a decision, right? So that's how elections are supposed to work too, and that's why, regardless of party affiliation or whatever, at the end of the day, whether it's Biden or Trump or whoever wins the election, we should be somewhat supportive of the outcome of that election and get behind America as an entity. Does it mean we have to roll over lockstep and form to every policy that they're pushing for? No. It means that if we're a Democrat, we have to get to work and we have to work harder to make sure that there's no incentives that are really damaging the American people or the workers or whatever our supposed standards are, right? But at the end of the day, if you're going to be a politician and go up there and spew nonsense just to get elected and then keep the status quo going, which seems to be a common thing because people fear change, we understand that too. But if the status quo is what's the reason for your profiting and all the lobbying and all the, we all know that there's all this corruption that's out there, some of it right, some of it wrong, some of it legal, some of it not, with inside trading and all these different conflicts of interest and revolving door policies and marrying the CEO's daughter and, just all this kind of stuff that needs to be oversight on, because there's conflict of interest in I posted this before, that campaign finance reform, conflict of interest in government, and inside trading. I am not for not allowing Congress people to trade. I say transparency. I don't think it should take 3 months for me to see what Pelosi's trades are. With blockchain technology and different sorts of technologies out there, I should know within 48 hours what her trades are. You want to trade, but at least that transparency and openness will allow people to see it and then say, hey, wait, didn't she just make a decision on that? And so obviously when you're smart and you're if you're trying to get around the laws that exist, it doesn't make you a good person that you're not breaking the law. So if I have to notify the public of a thing that I learned in a closed door hearing, and I go to Pioneer Press up in Glenview and post a public notice for a newspaper that nobody reads. No offense to Pioneer Press, God bless you. Do what you can do to keep the papers alive. But I'm legally done. I notified the public, even though nobody really heard about it. So I can go and do my trades and not be against the law. But it doesn't make it right. So the whole idea between morality and doing what's right and what's wrong. But campaign finance reform, conflict of interest in government, those were like, we need to fix that almost before we could talk about anything else, because when there's not that outside pressure from entities that are affecting what's best for the American people, then how can we fix any of those issues? So it's such a serious problem, and so many people were like, well, you're never going to fix that. Well, it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And so with that, sometimes when it comes to, like I said, if you want to run on all these ideas and I vote you in, or maybe not me, but the mass of people vote you in as a result of those ideas, then in some ways, maybe we should get behind and say, okay, let's see it. You do it, and then when you fail, you'll lose the next election because your ideas are stupid or whatever the case may be, right? Or we don't agree with your ideas, or you're not seeing the big picture on what that's going to do for inflation and all this other stuff. But in reality, everything's a theory. So sometimes you just got to give it a shot and see what happens. And unfortunately, the ideas that were presented over the last 4 years through the last administration, some things were a little better, but the numbers don't really, if I get behind the next administration with different ideas, well, in 4 years, we'll see. Are we better off or not? Or maybe there's stuff we could learn from that or whatever. But overall, we have to stop fighting each other and the idea of just being a straight up obstructionist isn't the right thing for the American people either. So there's a fine line there between getting support and changing the things that we feel are important. But how do we do that in a civil way?
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. Look, there is a great deal of mistrust, not just in government, but all public institutions. That's really festered for several decades now. That is really a core foundational challenge that we have to address. Like, why do we have so much mistrust, not just of our government, but the civil service, our police, certainly we saw that, after the George Floyd protests, of the media, of big business, of the church. And how can we correct this? Because these institutions are not going away, nor should they. What we need to do is figure out why there is so much mistrust, and what we can do to fix it. So you mentioned, not allowing members of Congress to own privately held stock, right? That is a very popular viewpoint. When you mentioned Pelosi, and there's no doubt countless of other members of Congress, and I remember the two Georgia senators, when they were getting briefings of COVID, immediately trading against it. Look, that might capture your head. One incident like that may capture your attention, and you might get upset, and then move on to whatever else you were doing with your day. Meaning it may be in isolation, two Georgia senators trading against what they know is coming after getting a briefing on COVID. That may in and of itself not be that big of a deal, but the constant drumbeat of news stories that undermine the public's trust in public institutions is it has led us to this point right now.
Yeah,
My
and
judgment.
100%, and that's the interesting thing is so my position is, it seems a little bit more on the libertarian side in a sense that less government, obviously less spending, and make sure we're focusing on specs. I don't mind paying property tax, especially when I see a new park go up in my community. Like, can I get some? But if you leave my house today, you'll see I have some new sidewalk out front with the shared sidewalk program. Like, I get to pay half of what I pay taxes for.
Right.
This is a fair deal. Like, it's baffling, right? And then there's a 4-foot section of curb that couldn't get done because it was on my neighbor's side. This is the street. And it's like, how do you not fix 4 feet of curb when you already got the crew out here? It's just ridiculous. So there's common sense things like that just seem silly. But overall, my position is I don't want to see anybody get their rights taken away. So just because you're a member of Congress and you're serving the public, you shouldn't lose rights to be able to trade. But show us what you're doing, because the transparency will show those situations. But in the same token, now we put that investor hat on. And you can't tell me that at the start of COVID in March 2020, I called my financial advisor, said, I'm fortunate enough to have $2,500 sitting on the side in a savings account, and the market just crashed. Am I supposed to think about, okay, what's going to be important in this aspect of this pandemic? Clorox might be a good thing to invest in because we're going to need hand sanitizers and masks. So being a smart investor and realizing that. But then what happens, like the far left comes out and says that this guy that bought 10 cases of masks because he knew N95s were going to run out, now he's selling them on eBay for 100 times the cost of what he paid for it. He's a vulture. He's trying to kill children. It's like, well, that somewhat is how the market works, right? And if he was smart enough to have some money on the side and invest in something that you knew there would be a low demand or a low supply of in the future, well, obviously the price is going to go up. So that doesn't necessarily make you a bad guy, but sometimes in emergency situations, we have to have some ethics also, and morality or whatever the case may be, But at the end of the day, I think podcasting truly is part of the solution, because, again, I'm not thousands of episodes in on Flipside Frolic by any means, but there's not a person of any position, however strong they feel, that can come and sit down across from you and have a conversation where you're mostly on the same page. And that's where compromise comes from, and that's where reasonable discussion happens. And a lot of this does happen in the committee meetings in Washington. And for people that haven't been to Washington and lobbied for veteran rights like we have, and I've been out there for the We Are One rally and some different things, and you see that they got 5 lobbyists out the door, the main congressman, all day long, and then you're bitching that they didn't read a 1,500-page bill that they got 6 hours ago. Like, okay, some of this is a problem, right? But there's a lot of people doing yeoman's work and doing diligence to try to make change out there, and unfortunately, they do get drowned out by some of that corruption because of those few, which the bad apple spoils the batch, and we all know that to be absolutely true. I know you're pressed for time. We can do this for 5 hours, as you can see, and easily, because it's fun, and it's. I appreciate your perspectives and your education on these topics, and that's where I learn, and that's where I get better, and we all get better from having conversations, and that's why I believe that the podcast space is such an important place to have the longer form discussions, because you can't get your point across in an 8-minute clip with some so-called journalist trying to set you up for just a viral clip of something saying something stupid or whatnot,
Well, look, I like the way I view the world right now is, we got to get meaningful work back. That often means manufacturing for working class people, and if we don't, they're going to revolt. And they're going to turn to folks like Donald Trump. So if you're of my political party, the Democratic political party, just use this moment in history to reorient thinking and getting back to building stuff.
And just for the record, as for the Democratic Party, which I have always been a member for. And I'm not even saying that I'm not a Democrat anymore. I won't say that. But I will say I'm getting real close to that undecided vote. And I'm not the only one out there. And so you're going to have to figure out a way, the DNC, to take these undecided voters that are just looking for results and bring them back into that party if the Democratic Party is truly. Otherwise, if your issues changed as the DNC or the Democratic Party, and it needs to go down and another party started, well, maybe that's what's supposed to happen too. Who knows? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be these two-party institutions that run everything, if they're not truly in what we feel is looking out in the best interest of the voter or the American people or the working people in this city. And
well, look, I enjoy these conversations a lot more than folks at, conversations at wine bars with. And if you enjoy these conversations, reach out to Carl and maybe be a guest on his podcast in the future.
Nice, appreciate it. So, if you got any social media, you got other projects?
Yeah, Thomas
what do you
L.
got going
Day on Twitter or X, whatever they're calling it these days, and my organization, Frontier Mission Network, frontiermissionnetwork.com is my website. That's an organization, a business consortium aiming to assert the Chicago region's presence in the defense industrial base and the national security industry. That's what I'm working on. Check out my website, and always reach out and love to chat if you want to.
All right, outstanding. Thanks so much for your time, Tom. I know you've been busy, and we'll have you out again, and we'll cover some of these. I had a few other areas that we wanted to talk about, but it's all good. I love it, and we'll keep it there, and we'll let you get out of here. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it, buddy. Cheers. Okay, that was fun. I like it.
Heck yeah, man. It's always.
Thanks for joining us at Flipside Frolic. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and maybe learned a little something about other people's perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and throw us a like on the video. Comment if you have any questions, and we'll see you on the next episode.